All right, it worked that time. Okay, so welcome to Deeper Than Dogma. As for our hiatus here, um, we're just going to come back and try to dive back into the conversations that we were kind of having before. Again, this is kind of like a very selfish endeavor for me, like this show, because it's more about like I really like to have these conversations. There's conversations out there that I want to have and that I don't always see in other hangouts. A little more targeted, a little more specific, things that don't last for 8 hours. And so that's just kind of the point of this for anybody that's going to tune into this or check this out for the first time. Today we're going to be talking about, why do atheists only talk about the Christian God? And it's funny because like the title to something like this could be, like this channel here, which is, probably a little more secular orientated compared to other channels that evangelical channel put out something like this. Different for them because if a fundamental Christian or a called "Why Do Atheists Only Talk About the Christian God?" They're probably going to reason something like, well, they know that God is true. They don't need to argue against other gods because it's only the Christian God that they need to reject because that's the only real proposed God. We're going to kind of talk about this from an actual viewpoint of people that are non-Christians. Why is it when we have these conversations do we find that we're only really stemming and talking about the Christian God? Tonight I got Negation of P and Floyd FP, and of course I'm Sokka, and let's dive into it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest reason is because that's the proposition that's laid upon us. When typically when someone says, "I believe in God," they're referring to a specific God. And in Western culture, in the United States and Canada, it's a general assumption that they're talking about the Judeo-Christian God, or typically the Christian God. So when someone says, "I believe in God," the person who's saying that actually has a picture or idea of what that God is with specific attributes. So I think so typically in Western culture there's a lot of assumptions made, as in any conversation there's always assumptions, and and that assumption is the God of the Bible or the Judeo-Christian God. So that's really the focus. When you start getting into more conversation with people, they might steer towards the God of the philosophers, or perhaps you find out they're a deist, or who knows, maybe they believe in a totally other God. But typically in these conversations,
sorry
in our
to
culture,
interrupt you there, Floyd. I'm having a little bit of issues with your audio right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hear me?
Is it too low, or?
Ned, how's Floyd coming through for you? Is it just me, or is it's him as well?
No, he seems all right on my end. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you sound fine.
Maybe try this.
Can you can't hear me at all? Is it broken up, or is it the volume's too low? Or?
Okay, so it's probably just me. My apologies, Floyd. Sorry. Carry on. I'm gonna refresh myself a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I think let me check the YouTube real quick. Let's make sure it's okay there.
Yeah, Floyd, you sound fine to me, man. I mean, I think it's just on Sokka's end.
Yeah, it was just me. My apologies. All right, sorry. Go ahead, Floyd.
Okay. I still sound okay?
Yeah, no, you sound great.
Okay. Yeah, so in any conversation there's hidden assumptions, unspoken assumptions. So I think when someone in our society, our Western culture says, "I believe in God," it's usually since Christianity is the predominant religion of our culture and so forth, we think of the Christian God. And I think when anyone invokes the proposition, "I believe in God," that person has a a specific image or view of what that God is, what attributes that God has. But I think a good question to ask is when someone says I believe in God, is to simply ask, well, what sort of God do you believe in, to get it out in the open, to get it clear of what God we're talking about. So but again, I think if someone just says I believe in God, I think there's a unspoken assumption that they're talking about the God of the Bible.
And to springboard on what Floyd was saying, I mean, to me, like I'd mentioned earlier, it's almost targets of opportunity. I mean, like Floyd said, being here in America, I haven't seen any other religion that is nearly as aggressive as Christianity. So when you put yourself out there in the public, I guess, arena as an atheist, the pushback comes primarily from Christian. Now, is that geographic? Probably. I mean, I'm sure that there's at least from the Muslim side, I'm sure there's some pretty strong evangelists out there on that end, to say the least. But even then, we're still talking about, at least an Old Testament based Yahweh type God. To really get away from that and get into, let's say, more Far Eastern type religions, or even Hinduism. Again, it doesn't seem like there's that many people out there preaching and trying to evangelize to the masses. And I mean, I'd have to admit, it's also, I think, at least a bit, if not a lot, of laziness on my part. Doing this for, well over 2 decades now. It's easy. I've heard most of, if not all of the apologetics out there, and I kind of feel somewhat comfortable in discussing this. Whereas if I had to, for lack of a better term, start over and start reading the Vedas and start getting into the Quran and all of the offshoots of that, I would definitely be behind, because when they would start quoting scripture, I'm not going to be nearly as well versed as I am from the Christian standpoint, which, makes it harder. Should I get off my ass and do that? Well, probably. But I think the other thing that may be feeding this is I honestly believe that even if I were to go and look at other religions, the counter apologetics that we tend to rely on would be somewhat, if not just as applicable and as useful as it would be when we're talking about the Christian God. So I don't know. On one hand, it bothers me because I do tend to get bored and tend to start to draw away from the conversation, just because it's so redundant and we get the same things over and over and over. So you would think that I would get out and try and find a different religion to see if there is anything out there. But it seems like I just tend to walk away completely instead of trying to find a different flavor of the month, so to speak. But that's one of the reasons that I was really glad you contacted me, because it makes me think. I mean, I think maybe I should, if I'm going to get back into this again, hopefully within, this next year, because hopefully things will be slowing down a little bit. Maybe I do, kind of wet my beak a little bit into other religions, just to see if there is anything out there that is at least new, if not more interesting.
Well, I mean, I think you guys both kind of brought up like this main point here, and one of them is our just first of all, like our exposure, or in Western culture, the exposure to religion is pretty much very limited, except towards brands of Christianity. But even if you take that into consideration, anybody that recognizes himself as an atheist or a non-God believer, non-theist, whatever, they seem to be more in the category, not necessarily of an atheist such against any type of like universal concept of God, but it does seem very anti-Christian. Like that is the only seriously proposed God concept that's even worth mention. And I'm sure every single person here can, come up with other God concepts that they have heard about. It's not like we're completely alien to them. But when it comes to the discussions, when we come to having to justify our own position, we will only justify it from the stance of dealing with gods with attributes that are similar to the Christian God. So when, and I mean, this goes back to like there's a huge influence from this. Most of the atheistic arguments that we know of, most of the atheistic arguments we've had exposure to from Western philosophers for the last few hundred years have always been targeted towards the Christian God. And I think it's that influence there that kind of leads us down the same path. But can you? I mean, should we have a level of skepticism towards the? I mean, we always have a level of skepticism towards other God propositions out there, other God concepts. But is it really rational to reject them, knowing as little as we do about them, or do we try to, because we've heard this before, where that. Because these you have all these different God concepts that are made up, and because we can reject a few of them offhand that we might have some type of familiarity with it, is it really rational to reject all of them because of that? How does that affect your atheist card at that point in time?
I think we deal with that when we deal with the general arguments for God, like the cosmological argument or the Thomistic arguments. The typical arguments that you have for God, because those arguments can be applied to to any creator God, just not the Christian God. So the Kalam just simply says that the universe began, so the universe had a cause, and they say, okay, well, this cause has to be a God. So when you just deal with that argument, you're just dealing with a very generic God concept at that point. In fact, that's the way a lot of evidential Christians would argue for their religion. They'll first start out with a argument like the Kalam cosmological argument, or some of the Thomistic ones, such as the uncaused cause, the prime mover. Things like that, and then from there try to once they think a generic God is reasonable to believe in, then they'll start adding on some few points to get to the Christian God, such as the minimal facts argument for the resurrection of Jesus, for example. So they, okay, well, because of that, Jesus was resurrected, and the God of the Bible resurrected him. So, and the Bible says that the God of the Bible was the creator of the universe. So that makes him the prime mover, the first uncaused cause, and so forth. So there you have a complete package and a full, set of arguments that's a collective, set of arguments to justify, their Christianity and so forth. So, I think that's the general angle they takes. But again, if you're just having a discussion about one of the arguments, such as the Kalam argument, well, okay, you are just kind of talking about a generic God at that point. I always felt that it would be easier to defend a God that doesn't have all the three classic attributes that's usually assigned to the God of philosophers, as well as the Christian God. And that's usually
omnipotence.
Yeah, and omnipotent and omnibenevolent. I think the most difficult one is omnibenevolent, because of basically the argument for the evidential argument for evil. I think there's so much gratuitous suffering in this world that an omnibenevolent God could not exist. But if you just drop that attribute off, okay, you're left with either an indifferent or an evil God who's possibly omniscient and omnipotent. But I don't necessarily think a creator God has to be all-knowing and all-powerful. right? He just has to know enough and to be powerful enough to create the universe. And that's it. Does he have to have all knowledge? Does he have to have all power? Maybe not. But I don't think so. It would be sufficient, but I don't necessarily think it would be necessary to have those attributes to create the universe. You just have to have the attributes to create the universe, whatever those attributes are, which I have no idea.
And interestingly,
I think the point you bring up there is a good one, and that is that when a lot of times when we talk about God, like the God concepts that's proposed by Christians and by a lot of different religions, we're always talking about a creator being of some sort, and that would mean that at the bare minimum, the characteristics that this God has to have is to be able to create the universe. That's it.
Right. Yeah. And what those attributes are, we don't know. They just have the universe creating properties in his nature. What are the universal creating properties? I have no idea. I guess one would be, the ability to create matter from non-matter, from immaterial. Always
materialize matter out of I guess
to create matter energy, perhaps to create space time, so forth. But that's all saying the same thing over and over again. I'm just rewording it.
You don't even need to grant that. I mean, actually, my daughter, she's in her mid-teens and she's into deism, and she has been for quite a while. And every once in a while we'll get into discussions like this. And it's not so much that they even have to be able to create matter. They just have to be able to compartmentalize it into a universe that seems, like ours, a bubble universe where we can't see outside. So you could still have the energy, you could still have the matter, and for lack of a better term, put it in a fishbowl. And as far as we could tell, it was created, or it came, quote unquote, from nothingness to begin with. So at that point, that type of God, I have to admit, I fall back to at least agnostic, if not admitting that there's no way to really argue counter to that, because we couldn't see outside of our own fishbowl. And it doesn't seem like there's anything, at least I can find, that inherently breaks any kind of fundamental law that we know of that wouldn't allow for that to happen. So if you believe in that type of God, what I've found is it's very difficult to get past that, what I call that first moment of faith, that I believe this because I get into because it makes you feel good, and because you like to think of having this God overseeing, but at the same time, this God could have just made it and walked away. I mean, it doesn't, at least at this time, look like there's any interaction. So if you've got a God that just makes these little bubble universes and just, for lack of a better term, sets them spinning and walks away, and whatever happens, happens, that's going to be really hard to, for lack of a better term, disprove.
Yeah. And I think that's really the biggest question I have as far as the theism, atheism debate. I think it really boils down to, is an initial mind required to bring about everything that exists today? Do we have to start with the mind because a mind can create things, or can they just naturally come about from impersonal forces? That's really the big question I have, and I don't have a clear answer. Do we have to start with the mind? I don't know.
But I mean, wouldn't that have to also, actually even go farther than that? And like, can a mind exist in some capacity without any material sense at all?
Right.
That seems like an even bigger grab than whether or not just the mind itself is required.
Yeah, well, that's where you get concepts of like divine simplicity, for example, that God is not made up of any parts at all. Because you have to start with God, right? So you're just starting with a mind, and you can't dissect that. You can't break that apart, because if you did, then those parts that made up God would be first would be primary, and you know, oh, you can't have that. So they come up with this divine simplicity, but other theologians reject the idea of divine simplicity. But these are the sort of dilemmas or concepts or issues that come up when you try to imagine a God. So you know, there's what's the term? Non-cognitive.
A theological non-cognitivist.
Yeah, yeah. You know, they look at these things and say this whole God concept is it doesn't make sense. So I don't even think, you know, so they don't even think we got a meaningful conversation about God. But to get back to the original point, I think the reason why we do focus on the Christian God is because, you know, besides going into these, you know, more sophisticated concepts like divine simplicity and the Trinity and so forth, the Christian God is a better defined God, just the way Ned said we're like a deist God. You know, is more vague. All we know about him is he was a mind that created universe, and he was done, and that's all we know about him. But you know, the Christian God does have more attributes, so we can examine it more. It's more falsifiable. Because, you know, we're talking about a God of creation, right? There's other gods of creation, but this is one God of creation. He has the omni attributes. He's claimed to be a personal God. He's a person. He's an actual agent with thoughts, and he makes plans, you know, and so forth. What else? He has the omni attributes that we talked about. And he's also a God of revelation, right? He interacts with the world. The claim is that he has communicated with mankind through actions, through his prophets, through scripture, and through the person of Jesus.
It also has values and desires as well.
Right.
Which is an interesting combination for something that can create anything.
And, you know, this guy has interacted in human history, you know, to the creation, to the Exodus, to Noah's flood, to the events of Jesus, the different miracle stories throughout the Bible. So the minute you make any of those historical claims, okay, that's something that can be examined. You know, historical claim was made. Okay, now if we have historical information, we can go back and at that period and examine it. We can see if what we know about history matches up with these God stories. And if they do, then I could support the existence of a God. But if it doesn't, then it goes against the existence of a God. And I think there's plenty of examples in the Bible where the stories in the Bible does not match what we know about history. So I think we can falsify the Christian God. So he's a much easier target than some generic God of the philosophers.
Well, I mean, that's what I was going to say. Is, I mean, it's the way you define the way that you talk about the Christian God, that the more attributes that you lump onto this, it becomes like, you know, like a Fisher Price My First Atheist set, you know, to deal with it, because it's not a really hard concept to start to tearing into some of the claims or the qualities or the attributes that are commonly associated with the Christian God. And especially when you get into like the more fundamentalists that will go into biblical inerrancy, that they, you know, in order for their particular brand of God to exist, you have to take into consideration all the historical accounts of the Bible that we know never happened, like the flood or the Exodus. And but again, like, those types of arguments seem more, you know, they're very they're very again, they're not as much atheistic as just anti-Christian. Is that, are we, when you get into these discussions, and I see this a lot. I see a lot of people arguing, you know, scripture a lot of with Christians about, you know, what God said, or trying to expose those what they perceive as internal contradictions within the Bible itself. I'm more curious about, is there a possible way for an atheist to step back and just, you know, propose a universal God concept that could encompass, you know, the most of the seriously proposed gods that we know out there, And wouldn't that be enough? Instead of having to get into these arguments against, like the problem of evil, like, assuming like the three O's for their God, or, whatever qualities we want to put on this. But at the very base level, as an atheist, what qualities does a God need to have for you not to believe in it? I guess is the way I'm trying to say this.
Well, again, what would be the minimum attributes that a figure must have to be considered, God? And I would go back to, has to be a creator God. He has to be, he had to have created the universe. I think that's really enough. I guess perhaps, well, I would say he would have to be a person too. He would have to be an agent. So we're talking about an actual person, an agent, a mind that thinks, makes plans, and so forth. That created the universe. I think, I don't necessarily think that God has to be good. I don't necessarily think that God has to be all powerful. Again, just powerful enough to create the universe, just knowledgeable enough to create the universe. I think that's really enough.
Well, but again,
I guess the question is, I guess perhaps to say maybe it has to be it has to be the first entity as well. Like nothing could have created it. It could, nothing. It didn't come from anything. It didn't come about. It wasn't. It's not contingent on anything previous to it. I guess I would add that as well.
So I would take a little different tact. I mean, I would base my test for God in its ability to act supernaturally, because, like I was mentioning earlier, I can get a natural cause for the universe. Albeit it'd have to be a very advanced naturalistic being, but I do think you can get a universe like ours at least plausibly created from a super intelligent race, but still completely naturalistic in their existence. Whereas to me, in order to fit, I guess, the God model, it needs to be primarily based in the supernatural, which that in and of itself, I think, makes it very difficult for anyone who believes in a God to have firm footing, in that anything and everything that we have ever discovered a cause for has always been naturalistic. So now when you start to posit supernatural as an explanation for anything, to me, that immediately erodes any plausibility almost of that, because we've never seen that before. So maybe if we're looking for a root, at least in my opinion, where we're looking for a root, I would start with the supernatural.
See, it's weird. I mean, we kind of talked this before we went on there, Ned. And when we're discussing the God concept, I agree with Floyd in the sense that the seriously proposed God concepts that we as atheists seem to argue against is the creator entity of in the universe. But and this is the part where I kind of sympathize with the theological non-cognitivists on this one, is that it seems kind of like we're putting the cart before the horse, and even granting that this fact needs to be argued, that there was a creator of the universe. It feels like, shouldn't there be a kind of like an established kind of idea that the universe was created in the first place? Because to even to say a God is at its the bare minimum the entity that created the universe assumes way too much, that I don't see that we could even have any type of way to that would be the prerequisite for a God.
Well, yeah, and that's why that's one of the reasons that I would try to move away from that, because I mean, like I did with a couple of the debates I had a few years back, is I granted that the universe was created. Now, it was created through naturalistic means. So where does your God go at that point? So if we get away from that and say, okay, all we have is the universe exists as far as we can tell. If we get away from solipsism and just say that we're going to grant that there is an outside universe, we don't know if it was existing, if it's last Tuesdayism, or, again, we go back into solipsism and it's all in our mind. It doesn't matter. If we're going to posit a God out there, what single attribute does that God have to have that we could not explain away through naturalistic means? At that point, I think you have to get into the supernatural realm, and it has to be based in a supernatural foundation.
Yeah, I kind of agree with Saka. I think, to look at the, what's the term again, Saka? Non-cognitive.
Theological non-cognitive.
Yeah. You have to find what is supernatural. Define supernatural in positive terms. If you say, "Oh, it's not natural," okay, you're telling me what it's not. Tell me what it is. Tell me what the difference between supernatural is and subnatural, or what's the difference between supernatural and super duper natural? I want to know what a good definition of supernatural is. You say outside of nature, not natural. Again, you're telling me what it's not. I want to know what is it then?
I would say first it would have to exist outside of our bubble universe and is independent of any of the laws, as far as we know, from a physical standpoint. So those two attributes right there, I think we can at least get started.
What laws? Causation? You throw out causation with that entire thing, and then you have no universe being created in the first place.
Well, exactly, and that's what you were trying to get to before, is that we don't need if we try to put, I think either you or Floyd said, the cart before the horse, in that we're trying to explain the not existence but the formation of this universe. Well, let's take it a step back and say, can anything exist outside of this universe and its existence be independent of any of the natural laws that we know of? It's not dependent on the natural laws. It's not contingent on the natural laws, and it can act in direct opposition to those laws. What does that mean?
Can you define something as existing if it's not part of the universe? Let's see.
That's a great example. Again, that's why I think supernatural, when you start to try to play with that foundation of this supernatural being, it gets very difficult to substantiate that and argue for it. Because if let's say that we take an Omni God. Well, okay, this Omni God is independent of our universe, but it's still, at least arguably, especially if we look at most religions, if not all religions, it has some interaction with this universe, which would mean it would, if it's not part of this universe, at least coexist with this universe, which to me makes it part of the universe, the grand universe. Maybe the cosmos would be a better descriptor instead of just our bubble universe. Now the cosmos, it's part of, so that puts us back into, we're all part of this cosmic existence, which again, it makes it very difficult to delineate between where is that line, and that's why I'm saying that's what makes me gravitate toward atheism and at least agnosticism, in that it's very difficult to even conceive of something being purely supernatural. But if we could get a God that is based in the supernatural and get good definitions and get good, I guess, attributes of what that means, then I think we could at least start to try to feel that out and see if any of it makes sense, or if it just, like what usually happens with most religion, it all falls apart at the seams.
Yeah, when you hear theologians say that God lives outside of space and time, they're saying that this God exists nowhere at no time. So
and everywhere and every time. It's both. It's not completely independent. It's both.
Yeah, I mean, how you wrap your hands around that? I remember like theologians like William Lane Craig. They said, before the universe existed, it was timeless, and then the minute he created the universe, he is then affected by time. At that point, he's living with, within time at that time. But I think they're just imagining things, coming up with this speculating.
Absolutely, there's nothing. There's nothing I've ever seen, especially like that quote. If it's the same one I'm remembering that Craig said, there's no scriptural foundation for that. It's pure speculation and just bold-faced assertion. This is what it must be. Well, why?
I think that's what theology is. Theology is just trying to speculate and read the mind of a God. You start with some assumptions or some facts that perhaps were revealed in Scripture or something, and you just try to see what that implies. Just try to derive other ideas from that. Well, okay, he created the universe, so if he created all matter, then okay, he must live outside of the universe. But if the universe is a space-time continuum, okay, then it can't be affected by time, and he has to be immaterial. But he can't be made up of any part. It just goes on and on. They're just armchair thinkers.
I always visualize it as two little kids on the playground talking about how big and bad their dads are, and it just keeps growing. Well, my dad can beat up your dad. Well, my dad can lift that rock. Well, my dad can pull that tree out of the ground, and it just grows and grows and grows. To me, that's how religion got, I guess, started, and why we ended where I guess we end with these Omni gods. They're all powerful because everybody's going to one up. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and they're even traditionally within the culture of the Jewish people. If you take a look at the Old Testament and the Bible was written around a time, or the Old Testament was written around a time when every single people had their own god, the own god that they worshipped. And when they marched into battle or whatever, they carried the standards of their gods up there that would guide them and help them in battles. And generally the army that won would only won because their god was more powerful, right? So therefore their god earns to be more powerful than the other god. Unless you're even if you have the most powerful god, iron chariots can sometimes even thwart him.
Yeah, but I guess to go back to the Christian God, quite a few times someone would ask, well, what would it take for you to believe in God? And when they say God, they mean Christian God. Well, what would convince me is if the stories of the Bible were empirically verified, and some of those things were evident today, were empirically testable today. The Bible talks about not only a God, but angels, demons, creation monsters, the Nephilim, all different flying creatures and so forth. If those things were all moving around us today, if once a year they had a heavenly parade up in the sky of angels playing trumpets and stuff like that, our worldview would certainly be different. And if that was present since the beginning of the human race, no one would question it. No one questions the existence of birds. These flying creatures that can defy the forces of gravity by flapping their wings, and there's plenty of evidence. We see them flying, we hear them, we see their droppings on our car hoods. You name it. No one questions the existence of birds. So with that, if this God interacts with us through history, it could be much more evident than that this God exists. Supposedly this God has walked and talked with Adam in the Garden of Eden. if this God continually walked and talked with humans, if he gave uh, a state of the universe speech every quarter, every quarter, it's like the President of the United States gives the State of the Union address. This God could offer a State of the Universe address every quarter. No one would question it. It would be on every TV channel. Everyone would tune in and want to listen and so forth. It would be not controversial at all. But we simply don't find that.
So I guess again, you bring up like a lot of good points of why you would reject things like Christianity. But I mean, even if we, and you're a huge fan of this. I know you have a lot of presentations that you've done here and a lot of debates that you've done about the historicity of Jesus, or the whether or not there was actually prophecy in the Old Testament. You do a lot of focus on the Bible, but I mean, I'm always curious to why you go to that extent there, instead of just trying to figure out first off, like, whether or not the concept of God is even a legible one to begin talking about in the first place. Have you ever sat back and said like that even engage in that type of discussion with Christians is to just grant them far too much, that before we could even start discussing whether or not the Christian God exists, we should first kind of nail down what is a God and why should we even believe it exists in the first place?
Well, yeah. Well, I think we talked about it earlier. Yeah, just coming up with a generic God, is harder to attack. But again,
it's also boring, I guess, too. Like,
yeah, but the more claims they have, then they're more easier to examine. And I think a common focus in the great debate community is just not Christianity, but it's evangelical Christianity. With their views of creation versus evolution, of young Earth versus old Earth, intelligent design, and they'll even make claims about the historicity of certain things in the Bible. As we had debates here and deeper in dogma, we had a debate over Bible prophecy. I've heard quite a few Christians say, "Oh, well, one reason I believe in Christianity is all the prophecies that were fulfilled in the Bible." And
like 210 of them, right?
Some go even higher than that. So when growing up, when I heard those claims, I said, "Oh well, boy, if the Bible made actual predictions and they came true, well, something has to be, something has to be right there." And then I would research it. To really argue against these sort of claims, you really have to understand the claims. You have to research. You have to do your homework. You have to understand the claims, where they're getting them, the arguments for them, and that requires work. That requires effort. If you really want to, criticize the Bible, critique the Bible, you need to study the Bible, and you need to understand what Christians are saying about it, what their actual beliefs are, what their arguments are for it. What facts that they claim they hold to come up with these views and so forth. That takes a lot of effort, and and I have been studying the Bible for many for quite a few decades now to do that, because whenever these claims have to come up, you really have to investigate whether they're true or not. So so I mean that's why I focus on it. And a lot of us focus on, if you want to have a debate with a flat earther, for example,
I don't.
Yeah. Well, if a flat earther came up to you and said, "Oh, well, why do you believe that the Earth is a globe?" And your answer is, "Well, everyone believes the Earth is a globe. That's what the scientists say," and so forth. Are those good arguments? Appealing to authority and stuff like that. No, if you're going to have an actual debate, you need to study science some. You need to, to get the facts right. Maybe bring up examples, like how satellites work, and so forth. You need to do studying on cosmology and physics and and geology and things like that. So if you want to be persuasive, you have to really study this.
So I guess with that, then I think one of the other reasons why we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier is to why do atheists talk mainly about the Christian God as well, and you brought up a lot of the examples of certain things that are adopted by certain branches of Christianity, like like the young Earth or even the flat Earth from some Christians there, and so that does have an effect on how people think about the state of reality. But the other thing is that because Christianity is a proselytizing religion, that this is they're encouraged to go out and spread the faith and talk about this, is that the bad ideas that are a result from this, such as denying of scientific fact like evolution or the shape of the earth or the age of the earth, they have a lot farther reaching impacts within those religions than you would with other religions out there. Like Hinduism is an example that I think that they have a much closer understanding of how old the universe is, but they're still off by huge values. But you don't have a lot of exposure to this. You don't have a lot of exposure to Hindu evangelicists or whatever, because they're not out there proselytizing on a daily basis. They're not on TV. They're not influenced government, and so just that presence right there too. That almost, it's not that atheists necessarily want to target Christianity. It's just that they put themselves on the front line.
Right. I mean, how many discussions or debates are there on the validity of astrology? Most people don't believe astrology anymore. It's it doesn't affect them. It's just a quaint little old belief that no one takes seriously. Oh, yeah, I'm a Capricorn. I was born this time, and so forth. And very few people really take that seriously. So there's not a lot of discussion about it because it doesn't affect them. Just it's like no one's having debates over the existence of Zeus, or any other of the dead gods of antiquity, because it's just not relevant in today's society. So it's not important. So people talk about things that are relevant today. Current events. Let's look at Fox News or MSNBC. Their nightly primetime shows. It's all about politics, right? Donald Trump is creating a lot of drama and news, and so on Fox News and MSNBC from 8 to 11, it's nothing but politics, because that's what's relevant today. So that's what people want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that brings up maybe a different tact and a different interesting point, in that a lot of these other religions, like Hinduism, there's no urgency. I mean, if you screw up, you come back, lower rung, lower tier, whatever, but you get another chance. Whereas Christianity, you get one shot. You screw it up, you burn forever. So I wonder if one of the reasons that they want to put themselves out there, or they feel the need to put themselves out there, is because of this sense of urgency. And maybe even on a subconscious level, we're kind of playing into that by going, well, if they're right, we need to focus on this because we don't get another chance. Whereas some of these other religions, if we screw it up, okay, we'll figure it out eventually. I mean, I thought of that when you were talking about the, the being a Capricorn or a Libra or whatever, and that really doesn't matter. Maybe my life would be a little bit better if that was true, and I could read the stars and I could, do certain things on certain days because I've got a better chance of, doing whatever. But in the long run, it's only really marginal, having a marginal effect at most. Whereas if Christianity is right, it is the ultimate effect. I mean, you're going to either be in heaven, literally, or in hell forever, based on what we figure out in these next 50 years or however much longer we're going to be around. So I don't know. That's just what popped up in my mind, is maybe that's one of the reasons we gravitate toward this, because it is so relevant. It does matter if it's real.
Yeah. Well, Christians evangelize because they think our souls are at stake, right? They're saying, oh, we desperately want to save your soul from hell. This is of utmost importance that you have to focus on that. So, they're telling us that we have to take this seriously and devote a lot of time. And then when you do, you get complaints saying, oh, why do atheists, if they don't believe in God, spend so much time talking about him?
Well,
they talk out both sides of their mouth.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too, is that when you are talking with a Christian, like there's a lot of religions out there that believe in different paths of faith. I was listening to Ben Shapiro and Sam Harris talking earlier today, and they're talking about Ben Shapiro was kind of putting out his idea of God there, and why one of the reasons why he doesn't proselytize is because he, as a Jewish man, he believes that as long as you follow the basic tenets that are set forth in Judaism, that you're okay, that you have a pathway to heaven that way. Believing and respecting the going to temple every single Saturday, those things aren't really required, and that's why you don't see Jewish people out there doing a lot of proselytizing. But and then on the other end, you have like Christians, which they target you. It's just that as an atheist, you are going to hell, and it's not just that. They also bake in all these other things out there. Questions about morality. Like whenever anything goes wrong, like it's about this is happening because people are turning away from God, and every person that's not of God is of some type of evil mind. And I guess that again puts them into kind of like the crosshairs for criticism, because you have most atheists out there. They're like, wait a second, we're not bad people, but if you're really going to call us bad, let's take a look at where you're even deriving this idea that we're bad people from, and we can show you that there's a lot worse of examples of stuff that you believe within your own faith.
Yeah, I mean, I've often seen the sentiment that Christians would rather have you be a Jew or a Muslim or just believe in any God than being an atheist. It seems like atheism and atheists are the biggest threats to their faith than any other religion is. And and just to speculate, I think the reason why that is because if no God exists, they could be wrong about their God. Perhaps some of the things in the Bible are wrong and so forth. But if no God exists, then they have no hope at all. There's no after. In their view, there's no afterlife. Life is temporal. So it has no ultimate meaning or everlasting meaning and so forth. So atheism is the greatest threat to them because it removes all hope. Whereas if some other religion is true, well, at least there's some hope that there is some God, and there is some hope of the afterlife, and hopefully this God is merciful enough to give that person a good afterlife or something like that. Because perhaps the God will say, oh well, you weren't a member of the right religion, but at least you believed in a God, and you made an effort to worship God. So I'll give you a pass and reward you. But if atheism is true, all that's off the table.
All right. Well, I'm gonna start winding it down here now, guys. Like I said, you guys don't like these going on too long here. So I'm just gonna we'll talk to Floyd and Ned here, and do you guys have any last thoughts on the topic? Why do atheists only talk about Christianity, or any closing remarks that you want to kind of make?
I don't have any specific ones. It's nice to have Deeper Than Dogma back.
I agree, and that's kind of what I was going to say as well. Is that, and I think we've touched on pretty much everything we can. I'm glad that you're back, and I really appreciate these kind of topics because it makes me want to come out and actually show up again. So thanks, Saga.
No problem. I think one of the things that I want to try to do here as well, this is probably a good point to end off on here, is that you notice that there's a small kind of like, there's only 3 of us in the room kind of discussing this. And we don't really have a lot of counter views right now or anybody else in the room. But what I'm encouraging people to do is to share this video. If any theists that see this video, if you have any disagreements, if you have any counterpoints, if you have anything that you want to talk about from either this video or any video that we put out there, is that I want to kind of extend this opportunity to redress some of these issues with people that actually have maybe points of contention with anything that we brought up. So we do kind of like, why do atheists only talk about Christianity, part 2, and actually hear some of the counterpoints that from people on the opposite view of this. Now we've tried to encourage this before. A lot of the times, a lot of the counter opinions don't show up until after the video is out, which would cause us to go into a topic again. But I figure if we put these out in kind of like a shorter dose of this is the basic idea, this is our view. Where do you disagree with this? And then give an opportunity to address that at a later date. And I think that probably Ned or Floyd would probably be willing to come back and talk about it at that point in time again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, in that, guys, anybody, thanks for tuning into this. If you like it, I'm going to be trying to do this again every couple weeks. If you have any ideas for topics, leave them in the comments or send me a message at the Deeper Than Dogma account here. And again, thank you guys for tuning in. Have a good night.